You ever just watch a movie and have a disconnect? You watch it and you're like, I don't know, it's just not working for me. Like nothing's really coming together to make this a special viewing experience. That's kind of how I thought watching the newest Netflix film, The Piano Lesson. Nothing is necessarily bad in The Piano Lesson. In fact, I'd argue most of it is good, but there is just something that kept me distant from this film. And that's what I want to explore and talk about in today's review of the film, The Piano Lesson, a movie that left me underwhelmed. And just as a brief introduction of this movie, this film is directed by Malcolm Washington, the son of Denzel Washington. Piano Lesson is based on the August Wilson play. We've seen recent adaptations of their work. In 2016, we had Fences starring Denzel, and then in 2020, we had Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which was one of the last films Chadwick Boseman appeared in. And this film follows the Charles family during the Great Depression as brother and sister Boy Willie and Berniece argue about what to do with a family heirloom, a piano carved by an enslaved ancestor. An element of this movie that I think doesn't work, and it is just the issue with adapting a play. In a play, everything feels personal as the performers are really like nearly feet away from you. It creates an intimacy. It allows you to be a fly on the wall in a story like this, which is very much a film about people in a set location talking and discussing ideas. And that intimacy, it allows the story of family to really come through. And that ability to be a fly on the wall, to hear these intimate conversations, really adds this dramatic effect. And really, you get to know these characters and be in this situation, feel the emotions. Just, it feels all the more palpable. In film, that intimacy is not a given. There is an inherent distance between the audience and the actors now, where that isn't built into a play. The Piano Lesson is unable to close the gap, and I think that's the biggest issue of the film is I just had a complete disconnect to the film that I was watching and how I was supposed to feel watching this movie. And that is not for a lack of effort. There is ultimately a lot to like about this movie. And I found my interest coming in waves. There are scenes where I really felt engaged with the material that Malcolm Washington was doing with August Wilson's The Piano Lesson. Like there were moments where I found the film to be absolutely exhilarating. There's too many quality actors in this film to not feel that way. Some of the staging that Malcolm Washington does in this film, I also found just quite brilliant. Like there is a way to make this house feel real and lived in and tell the stories of this family. And it's done well, to exception even in Malcolm Washington's adaptation. And there are performances, like there are bursts of performances in this movie that are exciting to watch. Like Samuel L. Jackson is giving a legitimately great performance in this movie. Ray Fisher is in this movie. John David Washington, Danielle Deadwyler. Like there's just too much talent for me to dismiss this movie outright. Like there is a lot in this material. I just noticed it could never hold on to my attention. That idea of it coming in waves, I'd be invested in one moment and then I'd kind of trail off as the film goes on, and then I'd get reinvested and then I'd lose interest again. I wanted to praise Malcolm Washington real quick because I know he's probably getting hit with some of the Nepo baby allegations. I've heard it. Obviously, he is the son of Denzel Washington. The Washington family is just very talented, and it's very clear. This film is competently directed, and it's well lit, it's well staged, and what I think Washington does so well as a director in this film is there is a certain cinematic quality to this movie that I don't think the other August Wilson films have had, especially the most recent two is what I'm referring to. I think this film looks and cinematically feels more like a movie than Fences or Ma Rainey's Black Bottom is able to achieve. Now, there's elements that are missing because I do ultimately think both Fences and Ma Rainey are more successful than The Piano Lesson, but that is not on the lack of effort of what Malcolm Washington is trying to do as a cinematic experience. There's a lot working in his favor, and to be honest, I think had he played more to the strengths that he does in this movie, I think the movie would have been all the more better for it. There are flourishes of the camera work that Washington achieves in this film. Like, just, it's exciting. Like, there's a few sequences in particular where the film just comes alive. In particular, there is this moment at the end, which I'm not going to spoil any of this movie, but there is a moment where all of the ideas of this movie kind of come to a head. And we take this family as they're having these real serious conversations about their history, about their past, about the future. And it all comes together in this final, like, 10 minutes of the film. And Malcolm Washington really just goes for it as a director. Like, there is a supernatural element of this movie, which I really don't want to get into too much in this review. However, I think it is fair to state that there is a supernatural element to this play. And that element really gets played up in the final 10 minutes of this film. And it really makes for something really exciting when the film breaks the convention of the stage and becomes, for lack of a better word, a movie. And I found it very engrossing and very engaging. And I think the film just needed more of it. And there's other scenes like this that I noticed. My favorite scene in the movie is there is this incredible scene about halfway through the movie where you have multiple characters and they are all sitting around a table singing a song. And those actors are composed of Samuel L. Jackson, Ray Fisher, John David Washington, and Michael Potts. 4 incredibly talented actors. And in this moment, the film just allows you to focus on incredible actors acting and showcasing that and framing them in a good light. Like, again, I mentioned this idea of this being a stage play, and we're always kind of at a distance because we're absorbing or / seeing the room. In this moment, it's something more. The staging kind of falls apart. And we're with these really close-up shots of these actors. And it's kind of cutting back rapidly, back and forth between them. And each actor at one time kind of just consumes the screen and is going for it. And you see Samuel L. Jackson. And you see Ray Fisher. And you see John David Washington. Michael Potts. Like, they're all going for it in this moment. And it's big. It's loud. The sound is very ferocious in this scene. And you really just get the narrative of the story at this point. You really feel the shared experiences these characters have, the pain, and it makes it such a compelling idea to go through and to be staged this way. When the staging of this movie essentially breaks down for this moment, it's kind of transporting of an effect. And I thought it was brilliantly used by Malcolm Washington, and the film just needs more of this. I think everyone in this film, The Piano Lesson, is largely good. Now, a lot of these actors were the original cast members in the August Wilson adaptation for stage. Samuel L. Jackson, John David Washington, Ray Fisher for sure. And I think everyone is mostly good in this film. Ray Fisher really surprised me. Having only really known him from Zack Snyder films, I thought Fisher gave a competently good performance in this movie, and he had just the right amount of humor. There was a little bit of a nuance to a character that doesn't always feel like they have a ton of nuance, and I like that. John David Washington is a compelling presence. I know people have their issues with him. I know he's been hit with the Nepo baby allegations, not allegations because it's proven, but like there is this like kind of understanding online that maybe he's not the best of actors. I've never seen it. I've always really liked him on screen. And I think he's good in this movie. I don't know if he's enough to hold the movie together as the lead. Like, I think that is a fundamental issue of this. I think he's good in this movie, but I don't know if he's enough to be the lead of this movie. He isn't able to absorb the screen time needed, the same way that a Chadwick Boseman or a Samuel L. Jackson can do in moments in this film, or the same way that, quite frankly, John David Washington's father does in Fences. Like, John David doesn't have that skill. He's a very competent actor. I find him quite an engaging screen presence. but he doesn't have that star quality yet to just like take over a film. And this film was kind of in desperate need of somebody to take over. And we'll get to that idea in a second. The performance that actually shocked me the most of the men is Samuel L. Jackson. He's barely in this film, or he's not in this film to really have a huge role, I should say. He's in this film quite a bit, but he's a lot of times in the background. He's so authentic in this role. He feels so lived in. I felt like I understood this character despite his lack of screen time and lack of dialogue in comparison to a lot of other people in this movies. I'll be honest, the performance, and I think this is maybe even the biggest reason I'm struggling with the piano lesson. The performance that I struggled the most with was Danielle Deadwyler. She plays the sister in this film. Berniece, I believe, is her character's name. And this role has had quite a bit of acclaim for her, and I'm just not feeling any of the acclaim. I felt her acting, and acting with a capital A. And I don't want to get this wrong. Like, Danielle Deadwyler is an incredible actress. Just such an incredible talent. Look at her a few years ago until, like, the talent is so clear and obvious. This is not to be a bash of like, oh, does Danielle Deadwyler actually have the talent to be an actress? Like, no, she has the talent in spades. And I understood the way that this performance was directed. It didn't land with me in a way that I would call favorable for me. Every time that she has a big scene in this movie, I really felt her performing. And it didn't work for me. Now, I want to just say, while I'm saying that for the most part, the performance didn't land, the final 10 minutes of this film, which is, I think, like the big moment of Deadwyler, and probably the most important moment that this character needs to nail, she nails it. Like, Deadwyler is fantastic in the final 10 minutes of this film. Like, nonstop, like, just an incredible powerhouse in this moment, where all the ideas of this story are supposed to come together. She makes them come together in a way that's pretty compelling to watch for a finale, and left on a very strong note. And I think that's also in the help of the cinematic direction from Malcolm Washington, because again, the film kind of breaks convention in the final 10 minutes. It becomes something a little bit more. And when you're no longer in this boiler room with these characters of the adaptation of a play, it's compelling. Like, the film really breaks the convention and tries something that I would call pretty cinematic to watch. Like, it almost transports you from the place, even though you're in the same place as the rest of the movie. Just the way it's staged, the way it's lit, the way that it's framed, the usage of supernatural direction. Like, it invokes horror in these scenes. And it's done really well. But ultimately, besides this scene and a few other scenes, the film is missing just something holding it together. And I alluded to this earlier with the John David Washington performance, and the fact that Danielle Deadwyler, that I had struggles with this performance. And also, to be honest, she is a supporting actress in this movie. She is not the main character of this movie by any means. What's missing from the piano lesson versus what Fences and Ma Rainey has is the central performance. This film doesn't have Denzel Washington. It doesn't have Chadwick Boseman. It doesn't have Viola Davis. It doesn't have that central performance kind of keeping the staging together and making the material non-repetitive. Because while watching this movie, I just kind of kept thinking that, like, a lot of the scenes felt like they were overplayed. And you had already heard these conversations. Like, especially when a lot of this movie is the brother character played by John David Washington and the sister played by Danielle Deadwyler. When it's all of them just kind of like going back and forth of why John David Washington wants to sell the piano versus where she wants to keep it, like, and it becomes very repetitive. I think for the people for who this movie worked, it is because they like the Danielle Deadwyler performance, and that was the central performance for them. I think the issue with it is specifically she's not on screen enough to be that character for me. And obviously I mentioned my issues with her performance. But ultimately, she is the skeleton key to understanding the piano lesson. All of the ideas of this film come through her. This idea of the past versus progressivism, the supernatural element of a people abused and killed in slavery. This idea of death and fear and being haunted by the cruelty and enslavement. Like, that is all within the source material. And it is all coming through her character. I mean, everyone in the movie is in some way working towards this idea and is a commentary / a reflection of this. A lot of these central ideas come down to this character, Berniece, played by Deadwyler. And to be honest, it needed more of that. So maybe this is me kind of saying I had issues with not only the way she portrayed this, but also the role of which this character had. From my understanding, this play is closer to 3 hours live when it was performed, which means stuff was cut, obviously. And I'm curious to see what was cut. I'm curious if some other characters got some more development. Just, it didn't feel like anyone could take the reins of this movie. And thus, I found it kind of lacking in all that. It's certainly watchable. And that sounds like such a low bar, but for a first-time director, I think that's a really good bar. Like, I didn't leave this movie thinking like, oh, Malcolm Washington is without talent. That's certainly not the lesson you should get away from this movie. The lesson I took from this is Malcolm Washington is incredibly talented. And I just don't know if he had quite the level of talent to be able to pull off this type of story and this tricky of an adaptation in the way that he did, even though there are moments of brilliance within the piano lesson. Specifically some of the performances, specifically some of the staging, specifically when the movie breaks convention. So ultimately, I can recommend elements of the piano lesson, but as a whole, I don't think it works. I don't think it is cohesive enough to work as a movie. I'm going to give it 2.5 out of 5 stars, but I would still recommend you to check it out because there's a lot of good in this movie, even if I don't think the movie is able to live up to some of its great elements. So thank you all for watching this review, and I hope you liked it. Make sure to subscribe for more reviews.